Hello and welcome. About 2,000 crores was roughly spent in 2009 between the two big parties and the Election Commission in conducting the elections and maybe administering everything that went with it. This time the number could be about 4,000 crores or so, but that's only the official number. The real number is going to be much higher, as we can all see. What is it going to be like, and what is really the cost of administering democracy in this country and cost of administering elections? That's the question we're asking. We've got two guests, Praveen Chakravarti here, who's also founding trustee of India Spend, and Ajit Ranade of the Association of Democratic Reforms. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us. So Praveen, let me begin with you. I just used 2,000 crore as a starting point. In 2009, this was the amount of money spent by the two parties and the Election Commission. What is it likely to be this time? And why is it going to be something we can't even imagine, perhaps?
Well, the official estimate, and if you look at the budget documents, I think what the finance minister has budgeted, I think is somewhere in the tune of 3,400 crores for administering elections. Now, while we are talking about elections, I also do want to make a point about cost of democracy is not just elections, which we'll come to probably later. But since we are in election time, so 3,400 crores is the official budget estimate. This is not including party expenditure, the official party expenditure, and of course add to that the unofficial. Now, how do you come out? How does one come up with any of these? I just think if you assume campaigning is nothing but marketing, and you have to market a certain product or a service to a certain number of people. We all know there are about 60 crore people or 70 crore, 65 crore people that vote. So if you assume that, I believe at least the Tamil Nadu example is the, you assume 200 rupees per person, per voter. That's it, that gives you the number right there.
So you said 200 rupees is the amount of money paid by a party or a candidate to the voter to entice him to come out and vote.
That or market to be able to reach out to that person and market oneself.
So we have, the word we are using now is outreach.
Outreach, marketing expense, probably, in the corporate world. So you know, there you have 60 crores times 200 rupees. That's your marketing expense. 1,200 crores.
1,200 crores. So you're saying 1,200 crores is the additional add-on per for the cost of reaching out to the voters, apart from the 3,500 plus
the administering.
That is the ECs.
That is ECs. 9 lakh polling booths and all of those.
And what the party spend?
So the party official spend again is in the range of about 1,200 crores each.
For this year.
For this year, and we're only talking about the two main parties. There are of course lots of other regional parties spend as well. So the official advertising spend is roughly in the range of 1,200 crores each for the two main parties.
So we're saying 2,400 plus 3,500, which is about 5,000, almost touching 6,000 crores. Okay, Ajit, 6,000 crore is the figure now we are starting with when it comes to understanding what the cost is. So actually, let's add 6,000 plus 200 into, So the marketing expense, which is another 1,200 crores as Praveen has estimated. So we've come to about 7,000 crores. How does that figure look to you for a start?
Govind, let me be more generous and let's take that would be 10,000 crores. That's roughly 100 rupees per person per Indian. And assume that the election is over a period of 5 years. That's about 20 rupees per person per year, which works out.
Okay, Ajit, I think we've lost. Sorry, Ajit. Come back.
So the cost of running India's democracy is about 3 to 5 paise per person per day.
Ajit, can you repeat the last sentence? You started out by saying that 10,000 crore is what you were willing to go with, and divided in the next over a 5-year period
to run India's democracy. I mean, even with a very generous number like 10,000 crores.
Okay, so Ajit is we're having
so 10,000 crores over 5 years works out to 3 to 5 paise per person per day.
Okay.
It's only about 5 paise per person.
Okay, So just hold your thought there, Ajit. 5 paise per person per year is what Ajit is saying. So that's not nothing.
So yeah, I was going to say. So is the insinuation that it's nothing? Now, see, I think, like I said again, this is elections. We're talking about elections. We're only talking about general elections. Don't forget, we have state elections.
Correct.
There is elections every 6 months in the country.
Yeah.
Right? So that's just cost of administering democracy. I think the larger point that I want to make is, what is a business model for a political party? There are 4,120 assembly constituencies in the country, or MLAs. If you assume that you need at least 5 party workers per assembly constituency, that's 20,000 party workers for one political party. You assume you have to spend at least $1 lakh per year to keep these people
gainfully
gainfully
employed, turning up at events.
So then that's per year. So there you have something close to about 200, 300 crores or even 500 crores a year just to run a party. Where is that going to come from? What is the business model of a political party?
Okay.
Where is that money going to come from? And that's what I mean when I say cost of democracy. I'm not even accounting for all the fringe expenditure, which is such as the society incurs, which is funding ADR or India Spend, which is also because of democracy. But I'm just saying, where is this? How are we even thinking about what about this cost?
Okay. Ajit, do you want to come back in now if you've got a gist of what Praveen is saying?
Yeah, Praveen and Govind,
yes.
That's the wrong metaphor to use. To start using language like what's the business model for a political party, in the first place, we assume that political parties are not business corporations. I mean, they are there, presumably business, because they are interested in public service. They are interested in representing the public. They are interested in putting up candidates who will act as people's representatives and participate in the debates and lawmaking and so on. So to use the metaphor like business, what's the business model? You can ask that how do you fund political parties? And we never ask how do you fund Tirupati, how do you fund Oxford University, how do you fund Taj Mahal upkeep. So,
Taj Mahal Taj Mahal is a very, very interesting point, because Taj Mahal is usually used to describe grand ambitions and of grand scale, which of very little relevance beyond that. Praveen, I'm sure when you say business model, you were wanting to say it with a certain reason. Yeah.
Absolutely, Ajit. I use the word business model deliberately, simply because we're in Bombay and this word seems to appeal more to the people that we talk to. But what I essentially am implying is exactly what you're saying. How does this get funded? And somehow, and for some reason, we do not want to seem to acknowledge this expenditure at all. This notion that public service is free is what I'm questioning, and that's why I use the term business model deliberately, so that only if you take it to the other extreme, then people actually understand the reality of such expenses. So when all the examples you gave, Ajit, Tirupati temple or a university, all of that comes back to just one thing, which is taxpayer funded.
But Praveen, I use those examples deliberately because they are very long standing. These institutions or organizations or even buildings have been around much longer than any individual private company that I know of. So when you use the word business model, it implies profit maximization. But what we should worry about is who is going to bear the cost. How are we going to fund the cost, which is a legitimate question. And if we start with the proposition that politics exist because there are people who want to come in public service, who are interested in becoming public representatives, who are interested in the process of lawmaking and deliberations. So let's see how to fund them. That's fine. How to select them, how to elect them, how to fund them. And that's a legitimate discussion and debate.
My point is, the funding is not merely election funding. See, elections is, if you consider that as a marketplace, you need players to play in that market, and you need viable players to exist and play in that market. So how do you ensure that there is existence of viable players on a sustainable long-term basis? Individuals going into public service, denying themselves of certain privileges that others would have, that is fine. But for a party, for a institution to exist, how do we ensure that it continues to exist and sustains itself?
But this institution, Praveen, is not along the model of a modern corporation with highly paid vice presidents and jet setting in business. We working on a different cost structure. They probably will accept a monthly salary which is perhaps 1/5 of so-called market salary, and their offices need not be located in the plushes real estate of the city. So it's their cost model is different.
Ajit, that's why I said out of 4,120 assembly constituencies, if you assume 5 people per party as party workers and a very basic salary of 1 lakh per year, which I'm sure you agree is nowhere close to corporate wages, that alone is 200 crores.
Yeah, so I mean, there could be membership fees. So there could be, the model of how to fund it. So long as there is transparency, there could be corporate donors, there could be what they call the public action, advocacy groups who collect money on their behalf, and so that it's possible. It doesn't have to be linked to a market process where you are selling votes. I mean, implicitly, if the party is going to sell votes or going to buy votes.
Ajit, okay, Ajit, so let me sort of quick intervention here. So, let me narrate some stats again. 300 crores cash almost found or discovered across the country. Andhra, of course, leads that statistic with over 127 crore cash found or seized rather. There's of course a lot of narcotics that has been seized. There's alcohol. All these are obviously the inducements to vote, part of the marketing expense that Praveen talked about. We of course don't know what has not been seized, but we do know, for instance, that in some cases like this one where 2 crores worth of cash was found burnt in a car in Andhra Pradesh. So all of this is part of the same cost that or the price that we seem to be expending or extracting from this entire process. So how do we address this, and does this form part of this equation that we are trying to address?
No, Govind, I don't agree that this is the issue of how to eliminate or reduce the influence of money power. We want elections to be pristine and to be pure, in the sense that people should vote without being induced by money or being bribed to vote. And this is an issue which goes back to Ambedkar, if not much older, that we are trying to build an edifice of a democratic society with very deep social and perhaps economic inequalities. But we don't want economic considerations like payment of money for vote to taint the process of voting. So I think that is a different question. This is not the question of administering the democracy or administering elections. It's a question of how to have a process where we eliminate the influence of money power on elections.
Okay, fair enough. So let me throw in through 2 quick questions, Ajit. One is election spending by parties means black money coming in back is white. Asked Shruti. She also asks why is it such a big deal? The business, the money spent gives businesses to many industries, or rather gives business to many industries, and has always been seen as a kick to the economy.
Certainly the liquor economy.
Certainly the liquor economy, says Praveen. Yes, Ajit.
Apart from the cash that you mentioned, which was seized, there's a huge amount of liquor and drugs, especially in Punjab and so on. So you're asking me how this problem of black money elections, because firstly, by definition, it's black money. If the ceiling per candidate is about 54 lakhs now or 70 lakhs, anything in excess
70, yeah.
So one suggestion is to either increase the limit or just have more, that insist that all expenses have to be only through a designated bank account or check payments. Which is being done, I think, by the Election Commission now.
So no, the problem with this is, to be fair to the Election Commission, the efforts that are being put into, let's say, go after black money and all these inducements that are given to voters has never been so high, and perhaps it will get better and better. It somehow still does not address the fundamental flaw in the system, which is perhaps the fact that voters are not voting for maybe those who want to, or not coming out to vote for those who want to, and they have to be induced. And that's where perhaps the whole business model question comes in. Praveen?
No, I agree. I think this black, green, white money and color of money and all. I just think there's a fundamental premise behind all of that, which is that somebody can define how much it costs to actually reach your message out to a voter. The reach your message out to a voter can mean anything, right up to inducing them to vote. Can we sit and define those? And I have a fundamental problem with that. I think we are completely not willing to accept that there are significant costs involved in a large country. If we are proud of the fact we are the world's largest democracy, let's also bear in mind that there is significant costs involved with that democracy. And let's not. So this notion that there will be very minimal costs involved is what leads to what is the definition of black or white or any of those.
Yes.
Yeah, Ajit?
Yeah, see, I disagree with Praveen because in a state like Tripura, you have 93% turnout. In Bengal, you had 82%. So I'm not sure that because they're throwing more money at Tripura in bigger numbers. So clearly, the higher voting turnout, 93% is an outstanding number. How much more do you want? I mean, even if we get 75%, I think it's a fantastic standards. So it's not because they are being paid money that they are coming out to vote. So, sir, clearly something is working in Tripura, something is working in Bengal, something is working in Puducherry, but Maharashtra is not able to cross 60%. So I don't think it's merely throwing more money and that will get voters out to vote.
It's not merely that. All I'm saying is there are costs. Now, see, they could be monetary costs, they could be otherwise. When I say costs of reaching voters, even if it means the cost of, educating a population 10 years, 5 years before the date of the actual election, that is also costs. What we're not accounting for is all of those inherent costs that have been incurred.
Praveen, hello, Praveen. Presumably, the technology of getting the message to the voter is easier in a place like Mumbai or Nagpur than in Tripura, and even then it's working. So it's not a question of how to get the message across to the voter. It's not, if anything, it should get easier with the internet and social media and electronic media.
Ajit, there's a cost involved in getting that message out. Technology may be there, but it's not free.
So, yes, agree.
There is fundamentally a cost. Cost does not necessarily have to mean monetary costs, a month before the election. That's all I'm saying. That's why the first point I made was, let's make it a cost of democracy as a whole, not cost of elections.
Okay. So what's the follow-up point to that? If having said that there is a cost to it, and let's assume that we accept here for a moment.
So let's accept that there is significant cost to being the world's largest democracy.
Right.
Right.
And it's, as you say, defrayed. I mean, some of it is in the 4 years, 7 months, and some of it is in the last 3 months in the kind of way we are saying right now.
Sure, absolutely, right. And those costs can be staggered, but there is significant cost. So that's the first. The second is, let's assume that even if there were, 100,000 people for every political party that are coming to into public life, depriving themselves of all material luxuries, it still requires funding to create institutions that will sustain. How are we going to fund this?
Okay.
In the absence of an answer to that, everything else that parties do to just meet this basic necessity of surviving becomes black money, green money, white money, and then we start moralizing over it.
Okay. Ajit?
Yeah, first of all, as I said in the beginning, that even with a generous estimate of 10,000 crores, it still works out to only 5 paise per person per year, per day in India. So that is, that's an acceptable cost of democracy. Secondly, how to fund political parties. I think at some point in the future, we need to ensure a level playing field. We have to look at some form of funding which goes beyond the private capacities and efforts of each party, so that the smaller parties don't get handicapped or be penalized. But before we get there, we need to have much greater level of transparency, much greater level of disclosure in political party funding and expenses, and only then can we start thinking about state funding. By the way, when we say funding political parties, we can directly think in terms of giving them the in-kind benefit, like for example, airtime on television. If they're going to spend in the US, for example, most of the money is spent on television. So if we can have a system where you can give them airtime, then that substitutes for money. But that's much later in the future.
Yeah. So Ajit, no, I'd like to hear your response to Praveen's larger point. He's saying that there is a cost which we are not acknowledging as a cost of democracy, of which elections is a key manifestation, which is the current manifestation. And because we are not acknowledging this cost, we tend to moralize on all the other attendant issues, including, of course, the expenditure that goes with elections.
No, I agree with Praveen's point that running a democracy like India, a large democracy, has a cost, and we need to think about how this cost is going to be met or who is going to fund this cost. But having said that, I don't want to imply that there is a uniform cost per person in all parts of the country. I gave you examples. For example, apart from this central, parliament and state assembly elections, we also have panchayat elections, district elections, municipal elections. Surely those are working without, and as I said, the examples of some other states where the turnouts are very high, I don't think the turnouts are high because they have a higher cost there. So there are ways of ensuring people's participation in the democracy and elections without necessarily throwing large amounts of money at this problem. But I agree that there is a cost and we must acknowledge it, and we have to find a way of transparently funding this cost.
There's another comment from Shaima. She says, if this kind of insane spending happens at the time of elections, it comes as no surprise that scams are unearthed every single day. Somewhere costs have to be recovered. How else will the quote-unquote investors benefit?
No, absolutely, and I think that is the point. We may call it scams and black. I keep going back to the same. Unless, we want to be more democratic. We want Panchayati Raj. We want everything. Everything to be a democracy. But not for a moment we sit back and think, what are the actual costs of that democracy, and how are we going to? In the absence of that, I think everything else, in my view, is mere moralizing. What may be scam to someone may be merely a cost of democracy to someone else. As the former Chief Minister of Andhra Pradesh, Rajshekhar Reddy, put it very famously, he said, I do not understand this word corruption, I only understand cost of democracy.
Okay. Ajit, putting on an ADR hat, if you were to look at the composition of candidates who are standing for elections and the kind of wealth they bring to the table, not all of them of course, but many of them, versus those who don't, and I'm talking really about the 2014 elections, what are the lessons here, if any, about those who spend and those who don't, or in the past those who have spent and not, or couldn't afford and could?
Govind, just give me a minute to answer that lady's question.
Yeah.
See, one of the reasons why there is this disproportionate amount of spending on elections is because of the perceived gains from coming to power. You see, we need to attack that aspect as well. Why is getting a seat as a member of parliament, why is that seen as a hugely lucrative, as a business investment? So if you have radical decentralization where you devolve powers in the 3 tiers of government, if not 4 tiers, perhaps this premium will go away and we won't see so much spending. But that's a point which you can't discuss in today's debate.
No, Ajit, there's a presumed causality there. You're assuming that they spend money because being an MP is lucrative. I could also argue all they're trying to do is recover the money that they've already spent.
Yeah, so, but that is an aspect which we cannot ignore. Anyway, so on this issue of wealthy candidates, first of all, ADR's position always has been on transparency. So we don't, I don't think we have any opinion whether there should be rich or poor candidates. But certainly, wealth should be transparently disclosed. In any case, if we are going to call them people's representatives, at some point we got to worry about the fact that if we have 75% of members of parliament who are crorpatis, is 75% of India, crorepati and so on. But that's a minor matter. We have seen on the basis of data for the last 60,000, last 10 years, if you look at 60,000 candidates across assembly elections and parliamentary elections, there is a correlation between amount of wealth of a candidate and chances of winning. So I think that continues to be true even in 2014. And partly it's because the personal wealth of the candidate is put to use as election spending.
Okay. Does that bolster your case, Praveen? Or?
No, I mean, again, I think this Ajit makes certain presumptuous causations which I don't agree with at all.
For example?
Like I said, the spending to become an MP because it's lucrative to be an MP. I think it could very well be the case.
So he's acknowledging that, yeah.
Right? So similarly, the crorepati definition, I've never really understood that crorepati definition. At least the data I have looked at is, even the correlation is not statistically significant between the amount of wealth and the winner. If you take into account that the difference in wealth between the winner and the loser is not statistically significant, and the fact that it was a binary outcome, one won and the other one lost.
Okay.
So if you take that into account, it's clearly not evident statistically that wealth alone is a big factor in deciding winners.
Okay, so you're saying several factors could come into play, obviously including which party you're representing. Ajit, another question. I don't know whether you have the answer to this. Sumita Kale asks, what happens to the cash seized by the Election Commission? Where does the income tax fit this into the accounting?
I think it goes to the Election Commission's kitty. Election Commission is, by the way, funded by Government of India.
Yeah.
Although it comes, it's not something that they have to depend on Parliament for. So I think it just goes to their overall general budget, the amount seized.
So, Ajit, let me come back to the point about candidates, right? And finally, because every election, whether it's local, regional, national, parliamentary, whatever, is finally broken down to the individual to stand. So, Praveen is saying that there is no direct correlation between the wealth of candidates and their eventual winning, because many other factors contribute to it. You're saying that the data you've looked at seems to show a strong causality. My question is really, whatever the past may have been, are things changing now? Are we seeing a shift, particularly with, let's say, the rise of the Aam Aadmi Party and so on?
First of all, Govind, I didn't say causality. I said that if you look at the data on last 60,000 candidates and just do a single dimensional correlation, it is the chances of winning if your wealth is higher. And in fact, in any constituency, if you look at the winner, almost surely the winner is in the top quartile or top decile in terms of wealth. In terms of what changes are we seeing, I think one distinct change, and we still have 2 more phases to go. It looks like the percentage of criminal candidates with criminal cases overall has come down, and even party-wise, I think it's slightly lower in many cases. And we will have to see among the winners, if we see the percentage of winners with criminal cases that's coming down, that's a distinct change. It means that people have voted against candidates with criminal cases. I don't know if there's any significant visible trend in terms of candidates' wealth. We are also, of course, seeing the biggest national trend in last 3-4 years is the increasing turnout. Definitely, it's a national pattern that the percentage turnout is going up year after year after year.
Right. Okay. So that's the good news, Ajit. And Praveen, what does this mean for the cost of democracy if more people are coming out and voting eventually?
No, more people coming out and voting is good. I think that's and I think that's also got a lot to do with the demographics of the nation and things like that. And so
which we must debate separately, of course.
Correct. Absolutely. Yeah. But the criminality or the wealth of a candidate, and that that being a factor in their winnability, at least statistically, I don't find significant evidence for that. There's only one thing that is almost intuitively clear to me, which is almost every political party selects what it thinks is a winnable candidate.
Most winnable candidate.
Most winnable candidate.
Right.
The factors could be identity, this. Generally, if you talk to a lot of the political parties, wealth of the candidate is not in the top 1 or 2 criteria. It's more to do with identity and things like that. That alone just tells me something.
Okay, fair enough. I think we've, Ajit, last word before we close?
One last point, Praveen. That's the thing we need to change, that winnability, as Praveen says, that the single biggest factor in giving tickets is winnability. So we want to break the nexus between winnability and criminality. So, anyway.
And I come again, Ajit? Okay, we lost that good word there. But anyway, we've run out of time. But I mean, I think the larger question is, what is the cost of democracy, or what is the price of administering something as large and sophisticated and complicated as this? And what does this really mean to keep us all satisfied in our daily lives as being part of a great democratic process? That's the question we were asking. We think we've got some answers, but there are more questions as always, including what it takes to bring this entire election together with candidates and the winnability, as the point that Ajit was making. We've run out of time on the India Hangout. We're going to be back. Thanks for watching.